All municipalities in Canada have an emergency response plan to deal with potential disaster situations. These plans include specialized training and communication networks to ensure the most effective and efficient mobilized responses that aim to minimize disastrous effects and maximize survivors and safety measures. The Ontario First Nation Technical Services Corporation was established in 1995 to provide expert technical advisory services to the First Nations of Ontario. The goal of the organization is to foster technical self-reliance of the member First Nations by provision of services in a wide variety of areas, which includes emergency response planning training. The Ofntsc client base consists of all 134 Ontario First Nations, including 16 tribal councils, 6 large nations, and 18 unaffiliated First Nations. Ofntsc maintains a collaborative partnership with Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, Health Canada, Environment Canada, Public Works and Government Services Canada, Human Resources and Social Development Canada, and the Ministry of the Environment and Ministry of Natural Resources, Ontario. The overall goal of Ofntsc's emergency response planning training is to ensure that First Nations have an updated master emergency response plan which enables them to effectively respond to emergencies. To accomplish this, Ofntsc developed a 4-phase approach. Phase 1, Risk Assessment and Introduction to Emergency Planning. Phase 2, Framework. Phase 3, Tabletop Exercise. Phase 4, Full-Scale Exercise. The aim of the phased approach is to provide interactive-based training that proceeds through a stepped method. By providing a full range of experiences, it encourages First Nations to take ownership of their plan, to develop, to update, identify gaps, identify resources, and tailor master emergency plans to their respective individual First Nations requirements. To date, 2 of the 4 phases has been completed. Phase 3 will be carried out through the 2013-2014 fiscal year. During this phase, First Nations will learn more about the incident management system and attest their plans through tabletop. The final phase of Ofntsc's mandate is Phase 4. This phase will introduce a full-scale mock exercise to test the practical aspects of training in Phases 1 through 3. This final phase requires a training incident location in a First Nation community which possesses both the human resources needed to train other First Nations communities, is also geographically located in a region that has access to major bodies of water, densely forested areas, and airport in both urban and rural areas. Six Nations of the Grand River is the most populated First Nations community in Canada and is in a geographic location that can satisfy the training requirements for all potential disasters that require a customized emergency response plan.
My name is Bill Montour. I'm the elected chief of Six Nations of the Grand River. The Six Nations is the largest populated community in Canada of First Nations. We have a total of 24,800 status members. I talked to the director of Ofntsc. They were suggesting that we need to have a mock disaster for training for other communities, including First Nations and non-First Nation communities. And we decided on a plane crash because this community is on a flight path going in from the southwest to the northeast. We're directly on a flight path for John Munro Airport in Hamilton. This whole mosaic of Canada is all about is being interdependent, meaning that we help each other. And I think with this exercise going forward, I believe it'll solidify a lot of relationships we have. With that, I'm Bill Montour, elected Chief of Six Nations, and I welcome the opportunity to host this tragic event in quotations. I hope never to see it, but I think we better be prepared rather than waiting till something does happen.
My name is Michael Seth. I'm the Fire Chief and Community Emergency Management Coordinator for Six Nations of the Grand River. When conducting mock disasters, one of the greatest achievements that you're going to get out of it is the education aspect of it. The evaluation that is completed as a result of it isn't an evaluation of the services per se. It's more of an evaluation of the plan and how well the plan fits. We would be able to take those evaluations, make a determination on whether or not our ideas on the development of the plan actually work. When it comes to other First Nations that will be visiting as a part of it, they will have the opportunity to see a plan that's been in place for a number of years, since 1993, be exercised, and to see how it actually unfolds with the number of services that we have in this community. They would be able to then utilize some of that information and scale it to their own communities and their own hazards and their own risks that exist there. This would be an excellent opportunity not only to showcase what services are available at Six Nations, but also to showcase the relationship that the service providers have with their counterparts in the communities neighboring us. Again, going back to the other First Nations that will be here to learn, they would be able to utilize those type of relationships and build upon them in their own communities, and be able to allow their own services in their communities to flourish as well. Because of the location of Six Nations and the size of Six Nations, we have a lot of the critical infrastructure here that a lot of municipalities have, yet we're still rural in comparison to the majority of the First Nations in Ontario. All of that taken into consideration, and the ability to have a catastrophic event that would trigger our emergency plan all comes into play. So having to have this emergency plan here and being able to prepare for a number of different types of emergencies that may arise is very important. Again, my name is Michael Seth, Fire Chief and Community Emergency Management Coordinator for Six Nations. I support the plan of Ofntsc to move forward with development for the mock disaster plan at Six Nations in September 2014. I think it would be beneficial not only to Six Nations, but to all the First Nations and even the non-Aboriginal communities neighboring us to learn from.
Closing the gap identified in the area of emergency response services is the next step in strengthening the training and safety measures that benefit these 134 First Nations and their neighboring non-Aboriginal communities. Six Nations of the Grand River has demonstrated its own history of successful partnerships with government agencies and with other Ontario First Nations in the area of essential training services. Investment into the final phase of this training program will provide benefits in the following ways: increased partnerships between government and First Nations communities. First Nation dependency on government response and resources will ultimately decrease and can evolve into a valuable partnership. First Nations workers will be effectively trained in the area of emergency response. Emergency planning education on reserve will increase. Improvement of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal relations. Investing in First Nations training opportunities in this specific area means that if a disaster or emergency situation occurs in a neighboring non-Aboriginal community, our trained First Nations people will be equipped to assist and support with the needs of that community through established networks of communication. Mitigation of unnecessary damage or harm. Training and preparation in this area will decrease response time in emergency situations and will enable First Nations communities to properly assess and respond effectively and efficiently. Empowering First Nations communities. With your support, the Ontario First Nation Technical Services Corporation can achieve its final stage of emergency planning with a full-scale exercise. Ofntsc and you can build stronger communities, agencies, and First Nations together.